Okay, guys, so we're going to give this a try. I know many of you have been missing our actual time in class, so let's see what we can do with going through this. I don't know about all of you, but I'm excited to actually get to kind of back it up and talk about some of this stuff, this human origins, early man, prehistory, Bronze Age type stuff. So I know some of you were having difficulty accessing the Flash program that's on GradPoint, and until we have an actual workaround for that, we're probably just going to try and cover all of that here and see if you can access those assessments at least and sort of be able to keep on track that way. I know this is all kind of crazy and unprecedented, but we'll see what we can do from here. Okay. So, um, starting off with human origins, there's a few things to hit. We need to cover a couple key terms. The first of which is, you know, what an archaeologist is, an anthropologist, paleontologist, all of these ologists, right? Logos, study of. So, an archaeologist is someone who studies things that are old, artifacts, things that you would dig out of the ground. You can see over here in the imagery, you've got arrowheads, chunks of pottery. There's even some. These are like sewing needles made out of bone, fish hooks. All of these type of things are items that would be created by human hands, and that's really the key point for this is they're created by human hands and they've been left behind. We can determine how old these things are a couple different ways. If it's organic matter, if it's something that was alive, like the bone fish hooks or something like that, we can use radiocarbon dating or what they call carbon 14 dating. And carbon 14 is an isotope that comes because of sunlight, right? Essentially, it's how we receive it, and it decays at a specific rate. So we can measure how much of that has decayed and kind of work backward to determine how old something is. The other method, which is a little bit less exact, is something called stratigraphy. Um, so if you remember from like your science classes, the Earth is divided into layers. So if we think of these different layers or strata as segments of the Earth, and these are not, it's not like the crust and the mantle. I'm talking more specific within the Earth's crust. If you go dig a hole in your yard, um, you'll see that there's layers of clay and loose soil and packed soil, some gravel. You might find a charcoal layer from some time when there was a fire. So the Earth is full of these. If you look at any type of archaeological excavation, you can see the different layers that are included there. If objects are found near one another in these layers, we can assume that they are relatively the same time period. So if you find something that you can date and something that you can't, and they're next to each other or they're in the same layer, you can assume they're from roughly the same time period. And we're talking roughly, like you're talking estimates of 20 to 50 years. Some of the other scientists we have on here, anthropologists, these are the folks who study culture, people's way of life, uh, how they live, religions, behavior, that type of thing. And then paleontologists are sort of the exact same thing as an archaeologist, except they work with animal remains and plant remains. So think Jurassic Park, right? Those would be paleontologists that dig up the bones of dinosaurs. Okay, human origins. As far as we can date, traveling back in time, um, several million years, we can get to the earliest human-like creature, what we call a hominin, um, existing in East Africa. So the province today is Tanzania. You can see up here on this little map the Olduvai Gorge or Oldavi Gorge. So this location, which is what you have down here in the bottom, is where the earliest or one of the earliest discoveries of human remains was located. So that particular human remain goes on to kind of set the precedent. So we have hominids, which are things that are alive or extinct, and they're the great apes. And then hominin, and I don't know exactly how the program we're using differentiates. This is a relatively new differentiation, probably within the last 2 or 3 years. A hominin is what we refer to as early humans that are related to humans more than chimpanzees. Like modern humans, us, we would be considered hominins or hominini versus, a gorilla would be a hominid. So that's really the kind of the differentiation there. But if we're talking about human migration, human origins, it does start, or humans start in West Africa. The hominin, that's anything that walks on 2 legs, and that's what we really differentiate there. Some of the oldest skeletons we've ever found are the Australopithecine or Australopithecus. As you can see here, it basically means lower human, or because we're talking in the southern hemisphere here. So I think it's southern man is what it translates to. Lucy and Artie are 2 of the oldest ones. And then if you look down here, obviously, Australopithecus isn't here. Australopithecus would have been only like 3 feet tall, and you can find images that people have done reconstructions based on the skeletal remains. This is Homo habilis, which is man with abilities, basically a man that can do things. You have then Homo erectus, man who walks upright or erect. Homo sapiens, which is man who thinks, and so we are. Modern humans are Homo sapiens sapien. So wise man, or thinking man. So in between here, we've got the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon man. So these two, and disregard the language. This is a German illustration, but Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon man are both considered part of the Homo sapien family. Both of these are now extinct. We're not exactly sure what happened, whether it was interbreeding, intermarrying, or what that eventually led to Homo sapiens. But Homo sapiens sapiens are the ones that dominate the planet today. They are you and I. If we look over here at this map, somewhere between like 400 and 100,000 years ago, early man originated here in East Africa. Then about 100,000 years ago, man started to leave. Let me see, Saharan Africa, the Egypt River Valley, moving into Mesopotamia, right around 100,000 years ago. Then we have a branch of humans that went up and into Western Europe, a group that went into kind of Eastern Asia across, and then up here across the Berenguela Land Bridge into North America, maybe about 10, 12,000 years ago, working their way then down into South America about the same time. You also have a group of people that started to populate some of these islands. A lot of these islands were populated. A lot of that's Polynesian myth. If you're familiar, if you're Disney, like I have been the past few days watching Disney Plus almost nonstop. Moana, right? So Moana is Polynesian, so that's this part of the world up here. So obviously those islands were inhabited by people, and they had their own set of gods and religions because they're relatively isolated from other peoples. So that's kind of how that explains how they got there. All right, so I know some of this is going to be choppy and unclear. This is my first attempt at doing something like this in a long time. As we move further down the road, I actually have some stuff that myself and another teacher in Virginia have made and are still making that deals with a lot of this. So maybe I can share that with some of you all too. So my sort of best point here, I'm just pulling my face out of the picture so you can see what's down below, for the Stone Age. Right, this is prehistory, so it's the time before we have actual written records of things that are going on. So history is the period of written record, so we're talking before that or pre that history. So we don't have a lot of written records, hence why we rely on all of those scientists, like the paleontologists and the archaeologists. They're the ones that tell us everything. You can see this is kind of a rough timeline of the Stone Age. You've got the Old Stone Age, or Paleolithic, right? Lithos means stone, paleo being old, so old Stone Age. And then the New Stone Age, or the Neolithos, right? New Stone Age. In the middle there, we had something called the Neolithic Revolution. This is often called, sometimes at least, the agricultural revolution. So that's when people start to plant things, they start to grow crops, settle down into villages, raise animals. Some of the earliest domesticated animals were dogs. But people start to domesticate animals, and then they find out that, oh, hey, grain grows here, so let's grow that and harvest that. If I can find a way to get them onto Google Classroom, I have some videos that go with this that we can preview too. I'll have to look into that a little bit. But so that's the Stone Age. When we talk about old Stone Age man, Paleolithic man, mainly hunter-gatherers. They lived in, temporary settlements, moved around the world hunting their food, very basic stone tools, a spear, a hand axe, which is basically just a kind of a big, slightly sharp rock. I always tell this story. I had a professor in college named S.B. Mani. It's from India, and he didn't have a first or middle name, so he just picked random letters at customs. I just thought that was kind of weird. But in class, he passed out this rock about the size of your hand, so if you were to hold like a stone that kind of came out to a pointed shape, he passed this around class. And I just remember, right around the time it got to me, I was holding it, kind of looking it over, and he was explaining what it was as we were, looking at this. And it was a hand axe. So this is something people would use for chopping. He said, it feels really good in your hand. It's made to do that. It makes you just want to kind of bash the person in front of you in the back of the head. A strange class. College is a weird place. You're going to run into some interesting folks when you get there. All right. So anyway, Paleolithic man, their tools. They're going to have fire. That's really something that by the time Homo erectus is around, fire had been in existence. Fire is going to be essential, right? That's what we have. That's what allows for life. Without fire, we have nothing. We can't cook our food, which, if we cook our food, it allows us to chew it less. Smaller muscles here, bigger muscle in here. So basically, it allows us to get smarter. So fire is essential to our way of life that we experience now. You also will see a lot of cave art. You can kind of see that's what's going on up in this panel up here. So the front picture of this presentation, when I was introducing it, you can see the caves. Those are the caves at Lascaux, France. And they depicted hands, but you can find lots of them that have animals. Usually they're hunting scenes or animals, and these would be kind of the earliest written record or written communication. It's basically what people were seeing, what they were aware of in that time period, and kind of what was going on. So it's a little window into what old Stone Age life would have been like. And these people would have been able to speak to one another, even if they didn't have a written language. And I was explaining to people, you don't need a written language to be able to communicate, right? We talk to one another all the time. And when you're a child, you learn to talk before you learn to write, right? So you can communicate orally with someone without actually having a written language. Those will come a little bit later. So Neolithic man, which is one of the areas that Grad Point focuses on more. I know I had assigned that today, and if you're watching this later, today is March 31st, right, last day of the month. So this is after the agricultural revolution. People are farming, and when you grow your food, right, you're going to want to live next to your food. So once you start growing food, you're not going to be moving around the country or traveling the area hunting as much. You're going to want to build a house next to this food that you planted so that you're close by and can take care of it. You're going to domesticate animals so you don't have to hunt as much. Not that hunting goes away. People still hunt. People still hunt today. but people raise animals more for food than they hunt for food. Um, you're going to have more advanced weapons and tools, especially agricultural tools, like the plow. The wheel comes about roughly in this time period. You're going to have tools that help you to farm better. As those tools get better, your job gets easier, which allows for more free time. Um, you start to have villages where one person might be able to grow enough food for 50 people. Well, if that's the case, then you have 50 people that don't need to farm. They can actually start to make pottery or work on weaving baskets. Maybe you have some that go hunting. Maybe you have people that make clothes, people that make tools, people whose job it is to get water. So these specialized jobs, then you start to see trade and barter going on. And life starts to look more like it does today. Excuse me. So, Neolithic villages, there's a few of these, and I don't know how many Grad Point has. Like I said, I'm kind of shooting in the dark for some of this. I can see those lessons, but I've also got stuff that I've always used, so I've blended it together a little bit. Jericho. This is a city on the what we call the West Bank, which is right in this area on the map up here. Aleppo, which is not marked on this map, but Aleppo's right in here. It's modern day Syria. And then this fun one to say, right, is Shatal Hayuk. Is located right up here in kind of central Turkey today. This is the Anatolian Peninsula up here. These are early settlements. Some of the earliest villages, you can see a diagram based on remains from Shatal Hayuk down below. People started to develop agriculture in large scale irrigation, crop rotation. Rotation allows you to grow, you know, say 2 different types of crops, and then you rotate through without exhausting the soil. You also see surpluses, which allow for more specialized labor. That type of stuff starts to occur in these Neolithic villages. Stonehenge is one I always found fascinating because we know Stonehenge is built somewhere during this Neolithic age. Somewhere in Neolithic age is roughly from about 10,000 years ago, so about 8,000 to 10,000 BC, up until about 3,000 BC, right in there. So we know that Stonehenge was built sometime during this period. Now it's massive. I personally have never been there, but if you look at these photographs, I mean, this one monolith here is probably 20 feet tall or close to about. So that's huge, right? It's even if it's 15 feet, which it's definitely bigger than that, but even if it's 15 feet, that's massive. These stones weigh tons and tons. So how they got there, how they got arranged, we don't exactly know. What we do know is the stones were quarried not that far away, but still several miles. So they had to get there somehow. No, no, it was not aliens. At least not as far as I am aware. What actually kind of makes sense is if you look at the way the stones are arranged, um, certain times of the year, in particular the winter solstice, the sun actually will set right in between two of these uprights. And so different times of the year, that's the case. So even if we don't know exactly what it was, looking at it based on the stones and digital reconstructions we've done, it appears most likely to be some type of sacred site. What sort of makes sense to a lot of people is that maybe this was a religious site. Maybe it marked a place of religious significance. It's built in a way that's religiously significant. And yeah, these stones are massive, but the pyramids are massive, and we know that people built the pyramids, and we know how they built the pyramids. So it's not that out of the question that this could have happened. So once you get out of the Neolithic Age or near the end of the Neolithic Age, we start to enter the Bronze Age. So the Bronze Age is the period where people started to use more metal weapons than stone. So you can see some examples over here in the picture. This is actually a stone like mallet that you'd use to shape the bronze. Now, Copper was discovered a long time ago. Copper's almost 8,000 years old. Um, Bronze comes later. Bronze is a blending of copper and tin. So, like it says here, about 88% copper, 12% tin. You balance that, you get bronze roughly. So bronze was used in China and ancient Greece, or the Minoans, about 5,000 years ago. So near the end of the Neolithic age, as we're kind of transitioning, you have this Bronze Age. Copper is a very soft metal. I don't know if anybody's ever done any electrical work, but you can bend copper wire with your hands, and it's not a stress on it. Copper, if you hit it with a hammer, it's going to bend. It'll flare out. You can get it to break. It doesn't take a lot. You don't have to heat it to shape it. It's very soft. Bronze is still soft. It's still easy to shape. I mean, it's 88% copper, but it's harder. It can retain an edge. So if you think of like an axe, right? A copper axe would only be good for so many swings before you'd have to kind of pound an edge back to it. Bronze tends to hold its shape a little bit better. So bronze is a superior metal to copper when it comes to making tools and weapons. Some other changes that are going to occur, you're going to see bronze used for things like plows and agricultural tools, as well as axes and weapons even eventually. You're going to see the wheel. You can see it here in this image. So the wheel is pretty old. I think some of the earliest records show it being in ancient Sumeria. So 5,000 years ago, roughly. The wheel is a game changer. It allows you to move things easily. And everything that we have is based off of the wheel today. And the number system that we use there, the Sumerian number system, we might get to this down the road, but it's a base 60 counting system. And I always tell people, I don't know if I can demonstrate this, but the way the Sumerians counted. So if you take your hand, right, your hand, so they would count with their thumb, and so they count each knuckle. So you've got, 4 sets of knuckles, or I'm sorry, 4 sets of knuckles and 3 different knuckles to count. So you can get to 12 with your 4 fingers, right? And you can do that 5 times. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you can go through that repetition 5 different times. So you get to 60. So that's the base 60 counting system, which is why we have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. I can explain the hours later. That has nothing really to do with that. But then you even look at how many degrees are in a circle, right? There are 360 degrees in a circle because it's based on that system. So it's 6 times 6. So a lot of that is based on the Sumerian math. But anyway, you're able to harvest more crops, grow things easier using this method. Social classes. We talk about having social classes today, and that social classes exist. Obviously, that is the case, right? We still have social classes, so they're not typically structured this way, at least not in our part of the world. So social classes are how we rank one another in society based on what we need from people, what people do, and all those type of things. So the longer people live together, the more they start to divide and stratify themselves. Typically these upper class people, like you might see, tend to be rulers, so kings and queens, or emperors, empresses, whatever you have there, and the religious leaders, so priests. If we talk about the Minoans or the Mycenaeans for a second, right? You had these war chiefs basically who were the rulers, and then you would have priests who held dominant positions in society as well. The middle class, which is made up of merchants and kind of your run-of-the-mill person, your artisan, your craftsman, right? The people that made things, the people that worked, the people that traded. And in some societies, merchants were actually the lower part of this because they didn't create anything. And then at the bottom are slaves. Now I include servants here because not every social class system is structured into 3. Sometimes you have 5 and 6 parts or more, but Servants are often in the lowest class as well. Slaves, if a society has slaves, are obviously going to be the lowest part. Not every society in ancient history has had slaves. The one that comes to mind is ancient India, which we'll get to. They didn't actually have slaves. They had a group a group known as the Untouchables within their caste system. So that name isn't a lot of fun. But the Untouchables, as you can probably guess, weren't even really a part. They're the outcast. I mean, they're not a part of the social structure. So they didn't have slaves, but they had this group there. And then you had the Shudra, which were like the laborers and servants above them. So most people in this time period tried to understand the world in some way. Typically, that was through religion. Science, like we know it, has only been around a couple hundred years. When we started this class, we talked about the Industrial Revolution. I mean, people were just starting to understand germs then. So that was 1850s. We're talking 5,000 years before that. People don't really understand what's going on around them. They know they are here, and that buffalo is over there, and that's food. But everything else is still kind of, how does all of this work? Well, religion became the answer to a lot of that. And for most people in this time period, religion was everything. It was a major part of their lives. And that's going to persist even for some people and in some cultures still today. But for worldwide, for all cultures, religion is pretty dominant up until about 200 years ago. Really, and even past that, religion impacted every moment of everyday life, which is, looking at the world today, it's crazy to think that that's the case, but definitely was, and in some places still is. Uh, so writing briefly, we'll just talk about this for a moment. So because we're going to get to this a lot later, but you can see there's three different forms of writing here, and I'll pull my head out of the way so you can see this. So Sumerian cuneiform, or cuneiform, is the earliest written language that we have, technically. And so it is actually written with a stylus like you'd use for a tablet or a Nintendo or something like that. But it's a triangular shape. So if you picture like a piece of wood that's a triangle, that's what makes these impressions. So you push down the tip, creating this kind of triangle, and then pull it across as you pull it out, making the line. So cuneiform, Sumerian, wow. I've been out of this for a while. Sumerian cuneiform is very complex. There's a lot to it. It's not a true alphabet like we have today, but it is a language that we've deciphered. We understand cuneiform. Hieroglyphics is a pictographic form of writing. So all of these mean something, and hieroglyphics is really fascinating. If we ever get back in school, I have a book, if anybody wants to see it, where it teaches you how to read hieroglyphics. I have read part of that. It is incredibly difficult because all of these are a sound, a letter, a shape, a meaning behind that. The only one that I can tell you with any certainty what it is this one right here. This is a feather. Feather represents Ma'at, which is truth. Now, what it means in this context, I have no idea. But that's what that letter or character means. And then we talked before about oracle bones in the Chinese script. That's what you see here. Some very early writing there as well. Now, most writing initially is to keep records. If you look at most of the Sumerian documents out there, they are about like how many bushels of wheat equals how many goats. That's not super exciting stuff, but that really is what a lot of the records keeping was about. And if you look at our society today, it's what a lot of our record keeping is about. If you were to just go pick a spreadsheet off of some business, is that going to be fascinating reading? No, but for a historian looking at that, they better understand the culture of the people. They better understand, what they found important, what that business is, what trade is, and you can draw a lot from that. Okay, so you're going to see this map in Grab Point if you haven't already. Kind of gives you an idea of the four main river valley civilizations that exist, and we're going to hit all of these. And depending on how long we are learning in this format, we may really get into some interesting stuff with this. But this is the Nile River Valley, Fluvius Nilus and Aegyptus est, right? The Nile River is in Egypt. So that's down here. You've got the Red Sea, Mediterranean Sea, Sahara Desert over here. And we're going to be actually kind of stopping in on Mesopotamia and Egypt early next week. So we'll be dealing with all of this then. So Nile River is probably the oldest river valley that's out there. Now we call all of these the cradles of civilization. This one had the name first. That's Mesopotamia, because two rivers cradling something, holding it like it's a child, taking care of it and all. And my typos included, right? The Tigris and Euphrates river valleys. So those are there. Then over here you have the Indus River Valley, which is where most of the early Indian population lived. There's another river that's actually, let me find blue here. There's another river valley that's right here, roughly. I'm not an artist, folks. It's called the Ganges River Valley. I'm not going to try and write that because that wouldn't be pretty. But the Ganges River is a sacred river for India, and we'll talk about that down the road. China, you've got the Huanghe, and we've talked about a lot of China actually already. So the Huanghe River and the Xiangjiang or the Yangtze River down here in the south. So those are the four main river valleys. Most societies are built along rivers because they supply water source, and that brings life to those people. Okay, elements of civilization. Let me get my face off of here for a second. So without all of these, you cannot really classify a group of people as a civilization, right? So you need to have cities. You're going to have cities start to exist. Without cities, you're not a civilization. You're not classically considered a civilization. You got to have government. Most early government is set up as a monarchy because that's the most simple and probably historically most effective form of government. One ruler takes power. Monarchy. Religion is a part of this. Some type of belief system. Usually priests hold power over this. Some type of social structure, which we already kind of touched on. Some type of writing, which you can't build a civilization without writing. Can't. You just wouldn't have a way to communicate the masses of information that's out there. And then the other is art, architecture, and design. So architecture is necessary for building cities. The religion's going to rely on art for the culture period. And you're not going to have an effective city without city planning. Best example I can give of this, if you go to a city like an actual planned city, so one that's a newer city, you could say, like if you were to go to I'm trying to search for one, Denver, Colorado. So Denver's laid out in a perfect grid pattern. It's a planned city. It makes sense. If you go to Pittsburgh, and I don't know how many of you have ever been, but I assume a lot of you have been. Pittsburgh is not what we would call a planned city, right? Pittsburgh was a slow growth city built around the steel mills and the rivers, and there are tons of roads that just dead end, one-way streets that don't make sense. So Pittsburgh, from that perspective, has poor design, and they try to fix that. Right? They're trying to kind of rebuild streets and put them in new directions to make stuff make sense. It's hard to fix something like that once it's sort of out there. So this is just a review slide if you want to look over those characteristics of Paleolithic and Neolithic man. I used to make my students memorize these, but really it's pretty easy to remember. So if you think about people that are hunter-gatherers, this is how I always kind of start. If you're a hunter-gatherer, right, in order to hunt and gather food, you're going to have to be nomadic, meaning you move around. You don't have a permanent home. You're going to use stone tools because you need to have stone weapons to kill your food. You're going to have fire because you need to be able to cook your food. You're going to live in small clans of people, groups of people, because hunting and gathering are team exercises. You need an oral language to be able to communicate, like, hey, there's an antelope over there. And your art is going to be centered on the hunt. So everything deals with the hunt and the gathering. When you look at Neolithic man, agriculture, domesticating plants and animals. If you've got domesticated plants and animals, you're going to live near them. So you're going to have permanent settlements. If you are in permanent settlements and you have a steady food supply, you're going to have specialized labor. To be able to have that steady food supply, you need more advanced tools and weapons to be able to take care of that stuff. So that's usually how I just kind of break that down. All right, so yeah, so this has been presentation number 1, probably of many. I see I'm kind of hitting it at about 35 minutes or so. I'm a little long-winded. You guys know that. But that's basically everything in a nutshell for this. I hope this was useful to some of you, especially those of you that have been unable to access the lessons in GradPoint. I did not hit every single thing that's in there, but I covered quite a bit of it. So I hope you're able to use this and have some success with it. Give me some feedback for sure. I'm sure I can be more exciting, but you know how that goes. So we'll revisit this in the future probably. Let me know what you guys think. Send me an email, and we can go from there. All right, thank you guys.